give a big St. Pete welcome to my friend Juliet.
Thanks, everyone. I'm so stoked to be here. This is my soul spot, and I'm really happy that St. Pete owns me forever. That's essentially what happened. Lindsay, I can't imagine a better kind of lead into what I wanted to talk about today, which is the concept of flow, which I think for all of us as creative humans, and all humans are creative, but particularly for creative professionals where you actually get paid to sit and think and make stuff, the concept of flow is vital. So I'm going to connect some dots because that's what we do and that's what flow is about. So I have always thought that talks that start with a definition are kind of lame, but I really couldn't figure out a better way to talk about the idea of flow. So I went and kind of Wikipedia'd it, and a flow is defined by a lot of things, but one of them is a steady and continuous stream. And as I began to unpack what that really means and meant, the idea of something being steady. So it is unbroken. It is not defined by giant swings of energy or giant lows of despair. It's not, it isn't distracted. It doesn't go a lot of ways. It's steady, it's quiet, and it's ultimately the most powerful force on Earth. It's ultimately what moves the foundations of the Earth itself. And so I think that is the idea that I come back to when we talk about, okay, so that's nature, we all know what flow is, that's established. But then taking a step forward and thinking about altering consciousness to improve your performance. And what is interesting about this is that he's not saying that your intelligence is altered. He's not saying that your physical state is altered, but what he did notice was that that your consciousness itself fits into an altered state, and the reason that it does that is so it can improve your performance. And he came to this realization, he and his school of psychologists, by watching artists, and this is obviously Christina's world. It's very moving to me personally, and what he noticed was the tendency for artists to become totally absorbed in their tasks, particularly painters, but this applied to all types of artists. So the idea that time passes and you have no sense of time passing. There is, Wyeth would spend hours and hours and not eat. 48 hours would go by and he was completely absorbed. Not like this is healthy, not like I'm recommending this, but it's a state of truly altered consciousness, which is raising that level of performance in which you are totally absorbed. So here's one of my trippy graphics, which I love. So flow, the flow state, flow psychology is really what I consider the science of achieving oneness. I think that Lindsay just kind of got us in touch with our own oneness in this room, with ourselves inside, with ourselves outside. But there is actually some real neuroscience behind it. So that oneness happens when there is that steady and continuous stream between a task, a goal, and your skill. So you got something you want to do, you know what the end result is, and you are able to do it. You know that you're able to do it. And this is kind of all the different states, and you see that flow is at the top right quadrant, and that's kind of in between arousal and control. So you are aroused, you're at a heightened state of consciousness, but you're not off the deep end. You are in control. This guy, I would love if someone could help me pronounce his name. It's Hungarian, but it's Mihaly. I know that, and it's a Hungarian last name, and we won't listen to me mangle it. But he in the 70s really started putting some clear science behind the idea of a flow state. And what he discovered is there's something called the Autotelic Personality. So it's Greek, auto meaning self, telos meaning goal. Again, that steady and continuous stream between the self, who we are, and what we are trying to achieve. And there are a couple of characteristics that define autotelic personalities. generally. So one is that you have a high sense of curiosity. And there has never been a creative human, a creative professional, all humans that I've met, that's not the first thing that is immediately apparent about them. They have a very high just degree to know why. That's really what curiosity is, to not just take things on their face. Low self-centeredness, so really your ego is there, it's there for all of us, but it's not prominent. It's something that is quiet, so you don't really care who's getting credit at that time. What you care about is what you're doing. And finally is performing an activity for the love of it. It's something that you love, that you would do if you didn't get paid for, even if it's work. That's great because you are getting paid for it. So this autotelic personality, it's interesting that there are 4 groups, kind of vocations really, that have a very high degree of autotelic personalities. The first one are professional athletes. And I think that we can all understand that idea that when this person, we can recognize it as fellow human beings, although I neither play tennis nor am a professional athlete, but I can see that she's in flow. Like she's completely absorbed. She's in love with what she's doing, with her motion. She's not thinking about herself. This is a goal, and she has the skill to achieve it. The second is in medicine, but not just any doctor. Surgeons, very specifically, have high degree of autotelic personalities. So when the surgeon is in absolute flow, they're doing what they need to do. And what's interesting about this particular kind of medicine is that it is, even if the operating room is full of 30 people, the surgeon and the patient are essentially, he's essentially alone in his own mind, so he's able to tap into that flow, or she, I should say. The third are mathematicians or coders. So the idea that when we have coders where I work at Adrenaline, and we have a rule that if they're wearing their headphones, you're not allowed to talk to them, because no matter how urgent, if it was really urgent, if there was something like the building was on fire, but other than that, don't bug them, because they are in that state of flow. And by taking you out, by interrupting that steady, continuous stream, it takes so much longer to get back in. So the idea that I think we can all understand this. I also think this graphic is beautiful. It's actually a Japanese image of a very simple equation. And then, but isn't it gorgeous? Yes. So, and then finally, no surprise, artists, visual artists, verbal artists. I don't know what you call writers other than writers, but artists. So this is obviously something that we can all understand. So professional musicians, surgeons, mathematicians, and artists all have this autotelic personality trait. Certainly doesn't mean that you can't get into a flow state, or a flow state isn't important to you if you're not one of these people, or if you don't have this personality trait, because we can all tap into it, but this is who gets into it most easily. So I want to I'm shifting the flow of the conversation a little bit to my flow state. And I've been doing what I do in this world, in this professional world, for like 20 years. It is something that I love to do. It's something that I would do if I didn't get paid for it. It's something that I hopefully I was going to say, I do, of course, have ego, but I am absolutely more inspired by what others create than what I do. So I just want to share a little bit about my flow state with you. The only creative maxim that I kind of think is important, or that I follow, and this isn't to denigrate any other creative maxim, but I have this on my office, and if I were the type of person that would get shit tattooed on my body, like words, it would be this: that is, the most personal is the most universal. So what kind of those individual quirks and ideas and feelings and stories that are personal to me are the only universal. So I bring this back constantly to our teams and to our clients, that don't go broad. Don't try and say everything to everyone. Don't wash off the edges. Get those edges in there. Take the part that is personal to you, that turns you on, brings a tear to your eye, lights you up, all of those things. That's what's going to connect to somebody else, because we are the steady, continuous stream. So that's my daughter. In the interest of being the most personal is the most universal, you're going to see a couple of my kids. She's my second youngest. Her name's Cassia. She is, I think this image captures a state of absolute flow completely. And I also think that one group that we didn't talk about is that children are kind of naturally get into a flow state. They just get completely absorbed, and it's a beautiful thing to watch and very inspiring. So the thing that has, throughout my career, helped me both get into my flow state, it is my own personal flow, my jam, is the idea of poetry. And it's also something that I see around, within, connecting, inspiring, everything, both kind of the world outside, the world inside our own emotional state, but also it has something that is very much flowed into my work and my life, and I see it around us as brands begin to adopt what poetry is. So I had a professor in college at the University of Florida, which makes me really a Florida girl, who asked us to, what is poetry? Like, what is a definition of poetry? And I think it gets sort of a bad rap because people think it's like rhymey, or they think it's like very ivory tower, or it feels like it could be too aspirational, or just not relevant in life at all. And so, everyone had their like definition of poetry, but the one that, of course, the professor came out with is this idea that I have yet to be able to improve upon, which is poetry is thoughts that breathe and words that burn. So it gives breath, it gives life to your thoughts that you have, and it does that through words that are burned indelibly inside of you, and that create marks elsewhere. I also think that poetry is very much a visual exercise, and this is an identity that we created for the National Center for Civil and Human Rights in Atlanta, and it is absolutely what visual poetry is, which is the distillation of a lot of ideas into something simple and beautiful that we can all connect with. It is obviously an equal sign. It's also a table that brings everything together, and it is a single unbroken line. And so this is now, if you go to the National Center of Civil and Human Rights, this is their identity. So visual poetry and poetry. So a little story about myself in the vein of the most personal is the most universal. My real ancestral homeland, even though my heart lives here, is New Hampshire. I was born there, and very different part of the world in general. Robert Frost said about New Hampshire from his famous poem called New Hampshire, do you know there are more poems produced here than any other thing? So I feel like I come from a great tradition with that. I'm going to read us some poetry that has moved me and inspired me throughout my career. That's a picture of me and my mom when I was very young. And this is a poem by Philip Larkin that says, "They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats who half the time were soppy stern and half at one another's throats. Man hands on misery to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can, and don't have any kids yourself." Obviously, I don't believe that's not my personal philosophy, but what I love about this is this guy was teaching at Oxford in the 40s and 50s, and he was a poetry professor and a poet, and what he comes out with is, they fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. This is language that all of us can understand, all of us relate to, totally human, all about that steady, continuous flow that connects all of us. And that's another picture. That's my dad, and that's me. I was born on a commune out in New Hampshire, very hippie childhood, which has served me well in my not-so-hippie life. But this is part of a tradition that my family has, that on certain birthdays, we write poems for each other. That's the gift we give. So I'm going to write this. My dad wrote me this a couple years ago. My daughter is a smarty pants. She writes as good as me. I know that's ungrammatical, but so what? So is she. She's pretty and successful. He has to say that because he's my dad. She's pretty and successful, and she makes a lot more scratch than any in our family. So far, she's quite a catch. She has 5 gorgeous children, well, 4+ to be precise. I was pregnant with my 5th at the time. A house, a man, a fancy job. Her life is pretty nice. And now she has a birthday, so we wish her all the best, though what she really wants is just a 41-year rest. Yay! That's my dad, which is great. It's this it is that lifeblood and that animating force. This is a picture of my wedding invitation years and years ago, 17 years ago, and it came on top of we had a bunch of kind of antique Romeo and Juliet copies, and so that was the gift that we gave to our wedding guests. But the invitation itself has a piece of poetry that is one of those things, thoughts that breathe, words that burn, for me, that I feel like is an absolute truth, which is, my bounty is as boundless as the sea. And isn't it for all of us, really? We have endless bounty. My love as deep. The more I give to thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. So it's that same idea. You give what you have away because it's infinite. It's an infinite source inside of all of you. And that was from Romeo and Juliet, William Shakespeare. This is my daughter, Delilah, so a few years ago. So I've carried on this poetry tradition, and when each of my children turned 5, and that has been 4 of them so far, I write them a poem. I feel like at 5-year-old children, you really kind of begin to know exactly who they are at that point. So I'm going to read you a couple of these. This is for Delilah June. You've never seen a firefly, you say, never caught the sudden breathtaking burst from the black. So all that summer of your brother's birth, you slip from your sheets and come to me. We sit and scan the still light depths of the yard until it grows dark enough to see that half-second lightning pulse. So quick, it fades before you even know it's there, but not before it keeps the promise you come from, the promise I will always make to you, my love. Magic is real. So this is the idea. She had never seen a firefly, and became our goal that summer. And so even though when I give these poems to the kids when they're 5, they're just like, whatever, where is my Barbie or my Hot Wheels? This is something that captures who they are, and it captures it for me too, because I can tap back into my flow of how I felt when they were that age. This is Elias. He just turned 5. For Elias Young, gravity changes around you. Unlike water, which softens the pull, your force is a deepening, an irresistible draw, like that moment when, minutes from birth, the nurse discovered the first mark of your magic. And I rose, head swimming, to see a perfect tiger's paw rising from wrinkled new skin, clear as if the universe had touched you one last time in the handoff, or the almost hidden streak of black in the white stars of your hair, or the way you shift the gravity of me, by your knowing, by your needing, by your unsoundable depths, by your light. So he has a tiger's paw birthmark, and he has like a blonde hair with a black streak. And I think that this kid is actually pretty magical. On the topic of visual poetry, this is just an image of my oldest and my youngest taken a couple months ago. And this, to me, has all the emotional and kind of psychological import of a poem itself. Because I see my oldest, who is 16, and my youngest, who is 2, I remember I can blink my eyes, and my oldest was 2, and that was him looking out. And I think that this image captures that steady, continuous stream between time and between what connects us. So that's Jonah and Jeremiah. Another kind of way that I connect to poetry and have throughout my entire life, this, if nothing else ages me in this entire conversation, this ages me, but a huge Tribe Called Quest fan, a huge old school rap fan, old school hip hop, but also new school. Oh, thank you. And I'm not going to do this because if I start saying this, I'm going to do my Q-tip voice, and I can't I won't put anybody in that, yes, we're gonna stay cringe-free this morning. But, low in theory. And then, I am very much into new school rap and hip hop. This is JID. He's actually from East Atlanta. He's like 21-year-old kid and an absolute genius. And I find that when I look for sources of poetry in the world around me, the best poetry is coming out of hip hop and rap. The kind of lyrical inventiveness and genius just blows me away. It's the kind of thing when you listen to it, like, my heartbeat goes up because I just can't believe how they're connecting language in that way. So anyway, I'm not gonna do this again for the cringe factor. Okay, so I also find that poetry is a way of making sense of the world around us and of our current moment. And I think that our current moment is an extraordinary one and a terrifying one. And if this is your guide, don't at me. But it's okay if it is, I guess. But there is, the day after, I guess it was November 10th or November 9th, after Trump was elected, I felt a little lost, and so sought the idea of poetry as kind of that sense that what was still is. And so I'm just going to read a little part of this. This is William Butler Yeats from The Second Coming. So turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. That's only like the first 6 lines of that. And if that doesn't capture kind of the current moment, it's hard to think of what is. But what's so comforting about it is that this moment is not actually unique. It seems extraordinary to us, but this moment has been, again, that steady, continuous stream from history to the present time. Again, just, making sense of the current moment. This is Sherman Alexie, another amazing poet. He's Native American. And this is an excerpt from his poem, Hymn. It happened to be published about 2 weeks after the family separations at the border happened, and I felt like there was a deep connection there. So this is the end of the poem, and he says, "I do know this, I will resist hate." This is hard for me to read without like tearing up. It's because it's so powerful. I will resist. I will stand and sing my love. I will use my fist to drum and drum my love. I will write and read poems that offer the warmth and shelter of any good home. I am one more citizen marching against hatred. Alone we are defenseless. Collected we are sacred. We will be courageous with our love. We will risk danger as we sing and sing and sing to welcome strangers. Just need a second there. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so I also am continually inspired by the fact that poetry has become a cultural currency. It's not become, but it is a cultural currency that we use to connect. So when there was the big political thing about somebody in the White House saying, "Go back to where you came from," I thought this happened to be Ilhan Omar, the senator from Minnesota, just owned the moment because she didn't say anything, and she just posted 4 lines from a Maya Angelou poem that said, "You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise." So she's responding to what the world has to offer through a poem. This is actually my youngest, and I feel like this is a great kind of encapsulation of the joy of just being and the joy of truly being in flow. And this is part of, I'm excerpting a Mary Oliver poem, one of the great poets. She just died last year. And this is from her poem called Wild Geese. "Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things." Okay, turning the corner, the flow goes on. Poetry has become one of those things, and Tara listed out all the companies and the brands that I've worked for, and it has been a career that has kept me passionate, inspired, and seeking more and more flow, no matter how many kids I have or how chaotic things are at home. Poetry has absolutely found its way into my work life, my life, my professional life. This happens to be a brand that we created called Avalon. It's basically a mixed-use development in Alpharetta, which is a suburb of Atlanta. You can go there to go to Lululemon. That's pretty much, it's like that and West Elm and coffee shops and stuff like that. But they were trying to create a brand that was all around the good life. So we built poetry, this is actually from their brand guidelines, these little bits of poetry that get actually put into the environment. So these are actually etched on the windows, these bits of poems. They have this beautiful fountain that they have that poetry literally etched in stone around it. So it's a way that this brand, which is all about, it could not be more about consumerism and just come here, stay here, feel good, buy stuff. But poetry has become a part of its heartbeat. I am gonna read this because it is a piece that they actually use. It's called their brand storyteller, and they don't. Let me just read it and then I'll say what I think is extraordinary about it. So again, this is for Avalon. The way the late summer sun sidles over pebbled tracks to the gate grown almost over, and the wind comes laden with golden honeysuckle scent and rustles the laced vines like her sister's hair tumbled wild in the wind. And as she runs her fingers over the unsplintered wood, she remembers things long forgotten, the invincible summer and how her mother's strong freckled arms lift her higher into the lilac dome of sky, as the grass beneath whispers its swell of secrets, and the world spins to other days in the autumn city, the bright rhythm of rushing footsteps, the welcome hot coffee smell, the infinite light, the hand that holds hers through a million turquoise nights, and she thinks it can always be like this. So what I think is extraordinary about this is that there's not a single thing that says come to go to Lululemon. There isn't a single thing that says live, work, play. There's not a single thing that says, be inspired by where you shop. It's not about that at all. It's totally about what this should feel like. And so they use poetry that I wrote as a way to make that point. This was also, now that I have kind of seeded this in your mind, you might begin to see it in examples around you. It's sort of everywhere I look now, including just last month. That was last month. Snapchat came out with their new global campaign. These are, they're big kind of installations, and they're quoting Yeats. I just quoted you, Yeats, about Donald Trump, and they're quoting Yeats and bits of poetry from them. So again, brands are taking this on, Walt Whitman, in a big way and owning it because it has kind of enduring cultural relevance. So, okay, I'm going to wrap it up. I just want to thank you for listening to all of that, but as a way to kind of connect the science that we talked about, that autotelic personality, those traits, and then connecting to your own state of flow. There are 6 conditions. These are conditions that I apply to my own life, and I hope that they are helpful to you. They're also based on the science. The first one is to single task. This is really hard to do, but it is to absolutely eliminate distraction. When you're truly in flow, you won't be distracted, but to get in flow, you have to make those distractions go away. So this is embarrassing to admit, but if I'm really needing to work on something, I have to put my phone in another room, because if I don't, it buzzes. It's so easy to just look at. It gives me a little dopamine hit every time I see somebody sends me a little heart emoji or whatever. So you have to be able to single task. The second that is essential is aloneness. So truly being alone. So flow doesn't happen when you're just kicking around ideas with your team, and it doesn't happen when you are when you're describing something. It doesn't happen when you get outside of yourself. You can be alone, and if I just had a total flow session while the room was filling up, you can absolutely be alone and seek that aloneness in your own, in a crowded room, but aloneness is key to it. The third is to find your peak time, and mine is like 5:30 a.m. I am a morning person, so this is great for me. 5:30 a.m. to like 7:30, which is my peak time. And then I have another one at like kind of 7 at night to around 9. Everyone's peak time is different. If you want to force yourself to be in flow, maximize that. Do what it takes to like make these conditions happen then. The fourth is challenge. So a flow state is not going to happen if you personally are not challenged by the task in front of you. The trick is, it can't be so hard that your skills can't rise to that challenge. You have to know that you can do it, so it has to have the right amount of challenge. But if this is like, flow state's not going to happen, like, don't have to tap into a flow state to answer emails. That's not the right level of challenge. Like, the right level of challenge is really about creating something. Fifth is no walls, and this is something that I just laid out for all of you, guys, that there should be no walls between the personal and the professional and the thing that you are creating and the application and the brand and all of those things. When you're sitting down to create, it doesn't matter what you're creating. If you're creating a video, if I had to sit down and said, somebody, like, write a video for a mixed-use retail development, that's not what I would have written. It's absolutely about taking down the walls and doing what inspires you. And then finally, love it. You have to love it. And this is one of those things, going back to the Autotelic Personality, it's something that you do because you love it. You take enjoyment in the activity itself, not in the end result, but you're doing it because you yourself are inspired. So you single task, you get yourself alone, you work around your peak time, you kind of appropriately challenge yourself, you take down your internal walls and your external walls about what it is you're creating, and finally just get yourself awash in the flow of the love of what it is you are doing. So thank you so much. What a pleasure.
Thank you so much. That was really awesome. It was really, really good. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'd love if you could talk just a tiny bit more maybe about your process of the taking down of the walls, because I think there's, for me, a little bit of a resistance to do that, in the sense where, like, this belongs here and poetry belongs here. It doesn't belong here. And can you talk a little bit if that's always been something that was easier for you because of the love of what you're doing, or did you go through a process where you had to actively take it down when maybe that felt a little bit unnatural?
I think that I came to this type of work kind of serendipitously. I started out as a journalist, so I didn't know that I was going to be a professional creative. So when I entered this world of professional creativity, I made what would be considered a lot of mistakes because I didn't recognize that there were supposed to be walls almost between, like, oh, you need to do an ad campaign for this, or do a brand strategy for this, or, whatever, do photography guidelines for this. So here are the compartments where they belong. So I entered the world completely naively and just never really recognized those. However, when I teach people, what I say about that is that the easiest way to get into a wall-breaking state is to get to very, very specifics. So if you are looking for imagery, or if you are trying to write something, or if you are anything that you're creating, get really specific about it. Don't say the big bright blue sky. Say, that's a bad example. That was a bad example. Don't say the beautiful young woman. Say the young woman with hair that was slightly over her shoulder and she looked like she had just woken up a few minutes before. Something like that. So you get really specific, or you get really specific with yourself. You pull from your own personal details. So that thing, the mother's strong freckled arms, my mom has freckled arms. Isn't that better than just her mom lifted her up into the sky? So the idea of just getting extremely specific. I feel like also just reminding yourself to be brave enough to say what moves you and to like tear up sometimes, or to do that, to be vulnerable, gives you the permission to begin crossing those barriers. Is that helpful?
It is. Thank you so
good.
much. Appreciate
Yep.
it.
Hi, I'm
Hi.
Steven. I'm a local photographer, and I think the whole idea of flow is kind of interesting. I could have used this talk like 5-6 years ago a lot.
Same.
One of those things that took me forever to figure this out. And I'm like, yes, that is exactly all the ways that make sense. I think my question is just, when you're in that state of flow, I've gotten to the point where I'm too good at flow, and I don't know how to get out of it.
Yep.
How do you find like places where you can kind of jump out of the flow to get something that doesn't require that done, and then like go back into your like single-mindedness and lack of, I get into that I can't like deal with other people almost because I'm so focused into what I'm doing.
Well, what I would say is don't get out of it. Like when you're in it, like there's a reason that you're in it, and don't get out of it. And of course, like the pressures of life and reality are going to pull you out of it naturally. There will be some natural stops, but I wonder why you would need to. I would stay in that state of single-mindedness and that flow, because really nothing feels better. You lose sense of everything. You're completely absorbed as long as you possibly could. That's IMO.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Hi.
Hi.
In the spirit of like being vulnerable and celebrating that, I feel like I've tried some of these things before that you talked about, and I feel that I've had a hard time explaining to others like where I'm trying to go with this and stuff. So like, how have you explained to others or dealt with others not getting you when you're like trying to do this process and get to like the big picture and the big idea, you know what I mean?
Yeah, yes, and I know exactly what you mean. So what I have done is I start with the end part, and I say, this is what the goal is. This is going to be the most amazing whatever ad campaign that is going to turn on this demographic, and you're going to have an incredible lift in sales or whatever. I focus on the goal, and then I go back to say, okay, so just go with me on this. Here's the way that we're going to get there. We're not going to get there by doing things the way that they're always done, because no one's going to pay attention. That's a meaningless exercise. So I start with the goal. Does that help? Oh, good.
Hi, this question kind of piggybacks on that question. So I work in corporate business-to-business marketing, and I see all of this, and I think there's no way my tech clients and business-to-business are really going to buy into creative flow and using words and poetry. So my question to you is, when you're pitching these very creative campaigns, so you're starting with the end result, do you have to incorporate return on investments, and do you have to really bring in numbers to get buy-in from C-level executives?
Yes, great question. And I like Tara just listed off my like sexy clients, but I've done lots of work in like the software as a service for like insurance providers, like that level of detail. And I work with a lot of like financial institutions now. Yes, I think, well, and first of all, I don't think poetry is right for every client. That's just my jam, and that's kind of what I see around me, and I pull from that. I'm inspired by that in creative work. Yes, you absolutely have to couch it in terms that audience will understand, but then you also have to say that this is not science. what we do is not science, it is art. It is art and science. There's some science component, like analytics, blah, all that stuff. There is that, but really this is also art, and you have to, and here's where, and we are going to, I always use this term with clients, we're gonna turn the dial to the art where we need to, and we're gonna keep it, but we're gonna keep it kind of rooted in what your customers are concerned about, or what our customers are concerned about, but we will turn up that dial as a way, because the person reading this, who's buying this, who's the, whatever, the global head of risk management at Invesco, they're still a human being too. They still have kids too. They still have great memories of playing baseball too, or whatever those are. So it's always based in a human truth. Yes, there's science and goals and metrics and ROI behind it, but it's an art form. And that's why you're you, and that's what your team does. They can run the numbers, they run the business. You have been trusted to do that.
Thank you.
Hi. So in your past life, you were a journalist, same. I'm curious how that carried over. What did that look like for that transition, moving over into the creative space for you?
Sure, I was working at a magazine. You guys might know it because it was one of their offices was in Florida. It was called Jazz Is. It was a music magazine, really great. And that was very clear to me about 3 or 4 years on. Well, I'll just tell you my story. The most personal is the most universal. When I was working at the magazine, they did have a New York office. I was sat in the art department, and I happened to notice, I was much more turned on by what our art director was doing than kind of being a pure writer. And so she was incredibly patient with me. She kind of took me under her wing, and we talked a lot about what visual storytelling is, and that's really where I understood that's what I do. That's who I am. I'm not just a pure writer, a pure storyteller. So I started just freelancing for gigs that were small enough that somebody without any experience, I could just show them my journalism book, and they could be like, oh, okay, you can kind of think like this, and started freelancing, got a big enough book, and then I was eventually, I kind of shopped myself around, and I was offered a job in this world. So also, training as a journalist, though, which is all about just interviewing and listening and keeping open ears and observation and checking sources and getting facts and doing research, is 100% I use that every single day of my life. So it's been a good transition.
Thank you.
You're welcome.